When people heard the words Donkey Kong during the 90s, they thought of legendary games that showcased the full potential of the Super Nintendo. Let's do a quick recap of our beloved ape. Donkey Kong was the mascot of his self-titled arcade game. In the game, he played as Jumpman, a little red and blue guy who hopped over barrels, climbed ladders, whacked stuff with a hammer, and fell to his death anytime the game decided he was 2 inches too high off the ground. While both characters are prominent icons of Nintendo today, it was actually Mario who held the role of Nintendo's mascot during the release of the NES. During the making of Super Mario Bros., Nintendo decided, you know what, monkeys can't shoot flames out their mouth, let's get rid of Donkey Kong and bring in a new bad guy. Donkey Kong would remain as a relic to Nintendo's arcade classic for over a decade, having only 4 NES games featuring him. These games kept getting worse and worse, however, until it seemed that Nintendo lost hope for the character altogether. Fast forward to 1994. Donkey Kong Country was the game that gave resurgence to one of Nintendo's long-lost icons. He had a fresh new design, his digitized world looked glorious, and it was jam-packed full of intense gameplay. That being said, there was in fact a Donkey Kong game released just months before Donkey Kong Country. The premise of the game involves Mario chasing after Donkey Kong to rescue Pauline. Instead of simply climbing girders, however, Mario must chase DK through jungles, icebergs, and even on top of a moving plane until the two eventually battle it out on top of DK's tower. In each stage, there is a key that must be brought over to a door in order to reach the next stage. For some reason, the key is larger than Mario himself, and it must be carried over to the door. The key's gotta stay with Mario too, because if he sets it down for too long, the key vanishes and returns to its original location. Each stage also has its own time limit. Every 4th stage, Mario either has to reach to where Donkey Kong is standing, or have a barrel battle with him. To be quite honest, the barrel battles are nothing special, but there are some small differences to each one so as not to become too monotonous. Mario would take a break from his fast-paced side-scrollers and return to the vertical platforming style for which he was first known. He was no longer equipped with the fire flower or feather, but instead the game introduced acrobatic techniques to aid his vertical movement. These techniques included the backflip, handstand, rope climbing, and swinging. Although the running and jumping is quite primitive, these acrobatic techniques must quickly be learned if you plan on beating the game. Fortunately, the game provides the player with a small cutscene every 4 levels, showcasing examples of when to use Mario's toolkit. If you consider the timing that's needed to perform the handstand jumps, as well as the quick flick of the D-pad to perform the backflip jump, it almost prepares gamers for what to expect for Super Mario 64, which would be released 2 years later. While the game's platforming focuses on precise jumps and well-timed swings, there are many puzzles the player must overcome to complete each stage. Sometimes the level can be as linear as simply reaching the key and carrying it over to the door, whereas in other levels you have to use the help of enemies, switches, and conveyor belts to bring the key to the door. Sometimes the ladders and the floors in the level are laid out for you, but in others it's your job to create the ladders and floors to make it to the end. Much like how the key disappears, the spawn platforms have a set timer to them, meaning they must be carefully placed for when you're ready to use it. The developers kept the limitations of the Game Boy in mind when designing this title. To keep the game simple for most players to pick up, Mario is only able to run at 1 speed. Moreover, in most instances, you can easily predict the patterns of enemies, hazards, and platforms. As the game progresses, however, the developers introduce new gameplay elements. Winds begin to perpetually push the player to the left, the locked door becomes invisible, enemies must be relocated by the player to be put to use, and sand blocks your path until you figure out how to bring the hammer down to smash it. This game, although basic at first glance, deepens into a complex puzzle solver, exceeding any expectations you might have on the Game Boy's hardware limitations. The only issue I've had is that the frame rate can get quite laggy when there is wind, making some of the airplane levels a bit more frustrating to beat. Out of a whopping 101 stages, my personal favorites are the ones where you need to throw the key on a conveyor belt and then quickly run a different route to pick it up, as Mario's controls are limited while he's carrying the key. This can lead to some intense moments as you're racing over to pick up the key before it disappears. Your actions must be carefully thought out before you get the one chance to act. Played out by the Game Boy's 4-bit Soundcheck, the sound effects in the game make Mario's backflip and handstand jumps more satisfying to pull off. The music begins with cute, cheerful tunes as Mario rides along with ladybugs in a happy forest. As the levels get more threatening though, so does the music. A minor complaint I have is that some of these threatening tracks still sound a bit silly. Some of the other tracks also suffer from hard-hitting notes in either the melody or percussion. These aren't major issues, as some of the songs usually play for less than a minute, but it does take away from the overall experience. If you were to play through Link's Awakening, a game released 1 year earlier than Donkey Kong, you'd notice a certain polish to the game's soundtrack. One thing Nintendo has been very proficient at doing, even in linear titles, is providing the player with different options on how to complete the game, no matter their skill level. Do you go the more dangerous route in hopes to complete the level faster, or do you let the fear of the game over screen hold you back and walk across every platform you can? Donkey Kong is no exception, and even in subsequent runs of the game, its replay value holds strong. This is how you design a game for the Game Boy. Have every world bring in new obstacles and puzzles, so that each level is different from the next. Add in wacky sound effects that complement the fun nature of a Mario game. Let the game save every so often, so that the player can pick it up and put it down whenever they want. And decorate the levels with beautiful backgrounds to let the player know that Mario's in a different part of the world. I mean, look at this. They fit an entire pyramid in the background, and in here they have pixelated hieroglyphs on the walls. Now, I won't spoil the final part of the game, but I will tell you that they did a damn good job making a boss battle that's actually fun. In just a few short months, Rare would release one of the best games of all time, and the face of Donkey Kong would forever be changed, quite literally. This game may not have been Donkey Kong Country, but it showed the world that Nintendo could revive their long-lost icon in a title that so masterfully represents what the Game Boy was made for. Not these watered-down, pocket adaptations of games that just made you wish you were playing the original, but solid, standalone titles that can be enjoyed anywhere you are.